Leslie Caron, the renowned dancing actress, faced her trauma head-on by bravely sharing her harrowing experience with the world. In her autobiography, she does not shy away from assigning blame, vividly depicting the individual she holds accountable for her devastating downfall. We'll delve deeper into this later. At first glance, it appeared that Leslie Caron had been incredibly fortunate from the moment she was born. Arriving on July 1st, 1931, she was welcomed into a life of comfort and privilege. Her father, Claude, was a French pharmacist hailing from a well-off family, ensuring that she had access to everything she needed. Meanwhile, her mother, an American who had once graced the Broadway stage as a dancer, brought a vibrant energy and a touch of flair to the otherwise traditional and reserved French household. For young Leslie, this blend of stability and liveliness created an idyllic childhood that many would envy, seemingly the stuff of every girl's dreams. However, what she didn't realize was that this seemingly perfect life was on the brink of a dramatic and unforeseen change, one that would alter her world in ways she could never have anticipated. Leslie's mother, Margaret, was often detached when it came to her children, showing little interest in their lives. To make matters even more challenging, Leslie's favorite nanny left when she was only 5 years old, adding to the sense of neglect she felt. Despite her mother's lack of attention, Leslie shared a deep connection with her through their mutual love of dance. In her autobiography, Thank Heaven, Caron recalls how this passion for dance began with a particularly nerve-wracking childhood memory that left a lasting impression on her. Leslie describes a moment when, as a young girl, she found herself standing at the top of the large main staircase in her home. Below her, 2 floors down, were her mother and her Austrian nanny, holding open a pair of panties, encouraging her to jump down into them. For many, the thought of jumping from such a height would be paralyzing, but for young Leslie it was an exhilarating challenge. Summoning all her courage, she took a deep breath and leaped into the air. To her immense delight, she floated through the space gracefully, landing perfectly with her feet slipping through the leg holes in one fluid motion. This seemingly small but significant moment marked the birth of her dancing spirit. It was a defining memory that not only showcased her natural grace and style, but also foreshadowed her future as a dancer, following in her mother's footsteps despite the emotional distance between them. Sadly, even the discovery of her passion for dance couldn't bring true happiness to little Leslie. The only thing more persistent than a child's craving for attention was Leslie's desperate act of literally starving herself to get it. This marked the beginning of what would become a lifelong battle with food-related issues, including 7 serious bouts of anorexia. At just 5 years old, Leslie initiated a hunger strike, and the pounds started shedding at an alarming rate, causing her parents to panic. They consulted numerous doctors, desperately seeking a solution to their daughter's sudden and severe weight loss. One doctor in particular made a radical suggestion. He advised sending Leslie to a boarding school in Switzerland, believing that the fresh mountain air might stimulate her appetite and help her regain the weight. However, this drastic measure was only the beginning of a long, challenging journey that would continue to haunt Leslie for the rest of her life. Desperate to find a solution, Leslie's parents made the fateful decision to allow treatment for her eating disorder. Unfortunately, this decision proved to be a grave mistake. At the boarding school, the headmistress took extreme and harsh measures, sitting beside Leslie during meals and attempting to force-feed her. When these efforts failed, the headmistress resorted to locking Leslie in the bathroom, ensuring that her cheeks were stuffed with hidden food, and threatening her to swallow it or face further punishment. Leslie, already fragile and consumed by her disorder, was subjected to this cruel treatment with no escape in sight. As if these harsh conditions weren't enough, fate dealt Leslie another cruel blow. While at boarding school, she contracted scarlet fever, a serious illness that further weakened her. The disease forced the young girl to endure the trauma of having her head shaved and being isolated in quarantine, cut off from any semblance of comfort or support. This disturbing ordeal reached its peak when, during a visit, Leslie's mother noticed the telltale bulges in her daughter's cheeks. Horrified, she pried open Leslie's mouth only to discover a disgusting amount of old, hidden food. It seemed as though Leslie's life couldn't possibly get any worse, but the reality was that her struggles were far from over. In an instant, Leslie's life shifted from the horrors of boarding school to the even more terrifying realities of World War II. Her family's once luxurious lifestyle, filled with champagne and caviar, quickly deteriorated to one of poverty, where they were forced to survive on potato peels and horse meat. The situation became so dire that Leslie had to fashion her own shoes from her great-grandmother's opera gloves. To this day, she conserves every bit of soap, sticking slivers together to avoid waste, a habit born from those harsh times. This brutal awakening left deep scars on Leslie's family, and the consequences were severe. Despite having grown up in poverty herself, Leslie's mother was far from the "at least we have love" type. The financial hardships that came with the war devastated her, leading her to drink even more heavily than before. Yet, even in the midst of this haze, her mother devised a plan to secure their future. Though it may not be fair to label her a gold digger, Leslie's mother became determined to see her daughter marry into wealth with the ultimate goal of becoming a princess. This single-minded mission would shape much of Leslie's future as her mother pushed her toward a life of financial security through marriage. Leslie was indeed a beautiful and talented dancer, and her mother believed that the only path to royalty was through becoming a professional ballerina. Fueled by this belief, Leslie made a bold and unexpected declaration during a Sunday lunch that would change the course of her life. With her mother's encouragement, she stood before her family and confidently announced, "I want to be a ballet dancer." This statement, however, was not met with the enthusiasm she might have hoped for. Instead, it was met with negativity. Yet, Leslie was undeterred. For the first time, she had a clear goal to strive for, a beacon of hope that guided her out of the shadows of her troubled childhood and toward a brighter future. Leslie undoubtedly inherited her mother's passion for dance, and it quickly became clear that she possessed a remarkable talent for it. At the tender age of 16, with all the sweetness and innocence of youth, she joined the influential Roland Petit Ballet Company in Paris, a prestigious opportunity that would have been a dream come true for any aspiring dancer. Not only was she experiencing the joy of pursuing what she loved most, but she was also unknowingly positioning herself on the brink of stardom, even though she was still so young. What happened next could have been the stuff of fairy tales. When Leslie was just 17, the legendary movie star and dancer Gene Kelly happened to be on vacation in Paris. By sheer luck, he attended one of her performances and was absolutely captivated by her talent and grace on stage. Kelly's recognition of her abilities was nothing short of life-changing. Just 18 months after that fateful encounter, this young Parisian girl found herself traveling across the Atlantic to America, where she was cast to star in the iconic feature film An American in Paris. This monumental opportunity marked the beginning of a new chapter in Leslie's life, one where she could no longer turn back. From that point forward, her journey into the world of fame and success was set in motion, and the little girl who had once danced in Paris was now destined for greatness. Leslie's love for ballet was undeniable, but her knowledge of American movies was quite limited, so she wasn't exactly singing hooray for Hollywood when she got her big break. Unlike others who might have started their careers with commercials or catalog modeling, Leslie dived straight into the deep end by taking on the lead role in An American in Paris. Her strong-willed French feistiness certainly made an impression, but it also left the Hollywood studios stunned. Leslie was adamant about maintaining her own unique look, refusing to let the film stylist pluck her eyebrows or transform her to fit the mold of the typical MGM star. To everyone's astonishment, she even went so far as to take a pair of nail scissors and dramatically cut off most of her hair to achieve the look she wanted. The studio, of course, didn't share her enthusiasm for this impromptu haircut. In a later interview, Leslie fondly recounted the incident, saying with a touch of humor, "So I arrived for the first day of shooting looking like a drowned cat." Her boldness may not have been appreciated by the studio, but it certainly set her apart from the crowd. When Leslie, the new act on the set, walked in with her self-inflicted haircut, the reaction was nothing short of shocking. Everyone on set was horrified by what she had done to her hair, and it wasn't long before she found herself standing in front of a lineup of studio heads who were clearly disappointed. As they stood there, shaking their heads in dismay, Gene Kelly tried to offer a practical solution by suggesting they film other scenes while they waited for Leslie's hair to grow back. However, when he spoke to her in private, Gene wasn't nearly as understanding. He sternly admonished her, pointing out that studios had fired actresses for far less. This incident alone was significant, but unfortunately it wasn't Leslie's only mistake. Later, Leslie herself admitted that the French tend to have a more relaxed, laissez-faire attitude toward time, which became an issue on set. On one occasion, she arrived late, much to the frustration of Gene Kelly, who noticed her tardiness immediately. Trying to make light of the situation, Kelly asked her if she owned an alarm clock. Leslie apologized and admitted that she didn't even have a watch, to which Kelly responded with a bit of sharp humor. "Honey, the war is over, and you can go into any drugstore and buy yourself an alarm clock." This exchange highlighted not just the cultural differences, but also the growing tension as Leslie navigated the expectations of Hollywood. As if the on-set troubles weren't enough, Leslie faced even more challenges during filming. On top of everything else, she came down with mononucleosis, forcing her to push through despite her illness. Given her malnutrition and the immense stress of working in a high-pressure job in a new country, it's no wonder she fell ill. But even mono couldn't sideline Leslie. Long before Flash Dance made the wet chair scene iconic, Leslie had her own sultry chair routine. She claimed she was just following the choreographer's instructions, but her moves proved to be too provocative for the censors. The choreography had to be toned down, but Leslie's perseverance and dedication were about to pay off in a big way. Despite all the setbacks, An American in Paris went on to win 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, a remarkable feat considering it was up against such classics as A Place in the Sun and A Streetcar Named Desire. MGM even ran a cheeky ad featuring their lion mascot looking sheepish and saying, "Honestly, I was just sitting in the sun waiting for a streetcar." Leslie's efforts, through illness and all, had contributed to one of the most celebrated films of the era. Leslie may have mastered her first on-screen romance, but her real-life love story was far from a fairy tale. While she wasn't naive, Leslie described herself as a virgin princess when she first arrived in Hollywood. This sense of innocence might explain why, shortly after her arrival at the age of 20, she rushed into marriage with Geordie Hormel. Unfortunately, this first attempt at marriage didn't go as well as she might have hoped. The two tied the knot in Las Vegas, waking up the minister at the Little Church of the West in the middle of the night. In the thrill of the moment, Leslie heard herself saying, "I do." But what started as an exciting leap into adulthood quickly lost its spark. It wasn't long before Leslie found herself transitioning from a virgin princess to feeling like a desperate housewife. She later admitted that while she had been pious enough to wait until marriage, the reality of what she experienced was so disappointing that she knew she had to get out. Reflecting on this brief chapter in her life, she referred to it as her childhood marriage, acknowledging that it was over almost as quickly as it began. Even though Leslie's marriage had ended, the aftermath was nothing short of a disaster. Seeking to escape her disappointing marriage, Leslie fled to New York to reconnect with Roland Petit. While she was there, shocking news surfaced. Her husband was revealed to be a drug addict. What followed was an ugly, bitter divorce, where high-priced lawyers accused Leslie of infidelity in an attempt to ensure that Geordie wouldn't have to pay alimony. Behind the scenes, Leslie endured tremendous emotional turmoil, but when it came to her career, she remained unshakable. Despite her personal life unraveling, her film career continued to thrive. In 1955, Leslie starred alongside Fred Astaire in Daddy Longlegs, joining an elite group of just 6 women who had the distinction of dancing with both Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire on screen. If only Leslie's love life could find some stability. Falling for the boss is rarely a good idea, but the way Leslie describes her director, Peter Hall, makes it easy to see why he was so difficult to resist. Tall, handsome, brilliant, charming, and incredibly persuasive, Peter had all the qualities that made him irresistibly attractive. Leslie first crossed paths with him in 1956 when he was directing her in the stage production of Gigi. From the moment they met, there was a palpable chemistry between them, an intense attraction that neither could ignore. As they worked together, their connection grew stronger, but they both remained professional, keeping their feelings in check despite the growing tension. However, this restraint could only last so long. The night of Gigi's opening performance marked a turning point. The intensity of their attraction reached its peak, and after months of working closely together, they could no longer deny their feelings. That night, the professional boundaries they had carefully maintained dissolved, and they finally acted on the desires they had been suppressing for so long. This moment was not just the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, but also a significant turning point in Leslie's complex and often tumultuous love life. Although Leslie and Peter didn't have a quick Vegas wedding, they did tie the knot later that same year after Leslie became pregnant with their first child. Domestic life initially seemed blissful, even though Leslie made the significant decision to break her contract with MGM and move to London to be with Peter. It was a considerable sacrifice, but the early days of their marriage were filled with happiness. However, the question lingered: could this honeymoon phase last? After the success of the stage play Gigi, Leslie took on the remarkable challenge of playing a 14-year-old in the 1958 film adaptation, despite being 27 at the time and already a mother. The filmmakers had to be creative with some of the costumes to make the transformation believable, but Leslie's performance was nothing short of impressive. The film went on to sweep the Oscars, solidifying Leslie's status as a Hollywood golden girl who could do no wrong, at least for the time being. In her marriage, the flourishing actress experienced a harsh reality check. What seemed like a golden couple may have been only gold-plated because as time passed, their romance began to lose its shine. Despite having a daughter and a son, creating what appeared to be the perfect millionaire's family, Leslie's state of mind was far from content. She yearned for more substantial roles in her husband's productions, while Peter envisioned her as the ideal, devoted housewife. The growing tension between her professional ambitions and his traditional expectations became unbearable. Feeling increasingly stifled, Leslie made the difficult decision to plan her great escape, determined to reclaim control over her life and career. In what had become a recurring theme in her past marriages, Leslie once again sought an escape, this time by taking on the role in the film Father Goose in 1963. During the filming, she attended a glamorous Hollywood party where she found herself seated across from one of the industry's most desirable leading men. The champagne was flowing freely, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement, and the spotlight of attention from Warren Beatty, one of Hollywood's most notorious and striking heartthrobs, was squarely focused on Leslie Caron. As the evening progressed, the flirtation between them grew more intense, with Warren's charm and charisma on full display. By the end of the night, he offered to take Leslie back to her hotel. By then, Leslie was far from the naive, virgin princess she had once been, but she was now faced with a new and formidable challenge. Warren Beatty, known for his legendary romantic escapades and rumored to have seduced thousands of women, was not someone who simply played the role of a gentleman. True to his reputation, he didn't just drop her off at her hotel and say goodnight. This encounter was more than just a chance meeting. It was a moment that highlighted the complexities and challenges Leslie faced in her personal life, where the lines between love, attraction, and ambition often blurred, leading her into situations that were as thrilling as they were complicated. In her book, Leslie recalls, "I lingered another week in Beverly Hills and had what they call a good old time." However, this fantasy couldn't last forever. It must have been incredibly difficult for Leslie to leave behind the thrill of her illicit romance, especially knowing what awaited her back home in England. After returning, she confessed everything to her husband and told him she wanted to separate. In a desperate attempt to salvage their marriage, he suggested they take a trip together, as one might in such situations. Unfortunately, the trip did little to rekindle their relationship. Leslie agreed to go, but sadly, the only heat they experienced came from the desert sun. She later described the trip as disastrous and was plagued with guilt over the impact on her children. However, fate offered her a small reprieve. She had a brand new love interest to help ease the pain of her unraveling marriage. The newly divorced Leslie was soaring on the highs of both love and professional success. Reflecting on this exciting period of her life, she remarked, "In Hollywood there was a place for me. Parts were coming up. I was one of the queens of Hollywood. Warren and I were like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie." Indeed, Leslie's career had reached new heights, and her relationship with Warren seemed to be the perfect complement to her rising stardom. She was more in the public eye than ever before, and her connection with one of Hollywood's most charismatic men only added to her allure. However, despite the seemingly perfect match, Leslie and Warren's relationship was not without its complications. Warren, with his love for drama and the media attention that came with it, repeatedly asked Leslie to marry him. Each time, she declined. Leslie was acutely aware of the intense scrutiny that would come with being half of such a high-profile couple, and she was adamant about avoiding that kind of public spectacle. "I just couldn't accept that kind of life," she later reflected, recognizing that the constant media frenzy and dramatic flair that Warren thrived on were not things she wanted in her life. Leslie's relationship with Warren eventually lost its spark after a couple of years, and in 1969 she moved on by marrying Hollywood producer Michael Laughlin. In 1975, the couple decided to relocate to Paris, but in an unexpected turn of events, Laughlin had a change of heart just a few days after the move. While Michael returned to the U.S., Leslie chose to stay in France, but this decision marked the beginning of a troubling and dark period in her life. Something was clearly amiss, and the happiness she had sought seemed to slip further away. The 80s might have been a prosperous era for yuppies, but for Leslie Caron, it was a time of deep struggle. Her third marriage had ended, her once celebrated looks were fading, and to make matters worse, the movie roles that had once come so easily were quickly drying up. As depression began to take hold, Leslie couldn't shake the fear that she was following in her mother's troubled footsteps. Leslie had always been an actress torn between two worlds, France and America. But as she tried to settle into her new life in Paris, she was confronted with a disturbing realization. She felt that she wasn't French enough for the French filmmakers, who seemed to be punishing her for her success in America. This feeling of being an outsider in the very country she had returned to led to profound regret. She began to question her decision to return to France and, overwhelmed by her circumstances, started drinking to numb the pain. This marked the beginning of a dark and difficult period in her life, one where she struggled to find her place and to reconcile her identity between the two cultures she had always been a part of. Leslie embarked on the project of restoring an old inn in Burgundy, but it quickly proved to be far less idyllic than she had imagined. The undertaking was overwhelming, filled with endless work, isolation, and constant worries about finances. Adding to her struggles, Leslie's deepening sadness became increasingly difficult to hide. By the time the inn opened in 1993, instead of feeling a sense of pride in what she had accomplished, Leslie was consumed by exhaustion and anxiety. She began drinking heavily, desperate to numb her fears and fall asleep as quickly as possible to escape her growing despair. Her greatest fear was that she would end up like her mother, who had tragically passed away in 1967, but despite her awareness, she felt powerless to change the course she was on. Then, the unthinkable happened. One morning, Leslie woke up overwhelmed by despair and decided she wanted to end it all. She took a dangerous mix of too many pills and too much alcohol. Reflecting on that moment later, she described it as a bit of a gamble. You toss it up in the air to see if you're going to wake up. Thankfully, Leslie did wake up 2 days later and realized it was time to seek help. This terrifying episode marked a turning point for her. She spent a month in the hospital where she began the process of healing. During her recovery, Leslie started therapy, attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and began writing her memoirs. Surprisingly, it was the act of writing that truly helped her come to terms with her past. Through her brutally honest words, she came to a profound realization. She had been consumed by her mother's personality for years, but now she had finally severed that emotional connection, freeing herself to heal and move forward. The recent pandemic led many people to reevaluate their lives, and Leslie was no exception. Despite still taking on occasional acting roles and even winning an Emmy for her 2006 appearance on Law and Order, Leslie ultimately decided it was time to retire. After everything she had been through, it seemed that she had finally found her version of a happily ever after. She hasn't touched a drink in decades, enjoys spending time with her dog, and takes pleasure in the simple joys of staying up late and sleeping in. It sounds like she has finally found a life she truly loves. And remember, if you've enjoyed this story or others like it, don't forget to show your support by subscribing and hitting the like button. Stay tuned for more informative and exciting stories just like this one.